Well, I thank you for that. Actually, as a rule, it was a wonderful part and wonderful support.
For more than 30 years, John Wayne's Newport Beach mansion stood like a sealed time capsule, a fortress of silence that no outsider dared to disturb. After Wayne's death in 1979, his home became a frozen monument to the man the world knew as the Duke. While his films continued to air on television, while his face remained immortalized on posters and memorabilia, the house itself told a different story, one hidden behind locked doors and shuttered windows. Friends whispered that treasures remained untouched inside. From rare photographs to personal letters Wayne had never shared with the world. For decades, the estate was off-limit, a mystery that even die-hard fans could only speculate about. But in 2011, everything changed. The mansion was finally open, and what was discovered inside shocked not only Wayne's family, but also the historians who had spent years piecing together his life. A hidden will, forgotten letters, rare memorabilia, and clues about Wayne's most guarded secrets were finally uncovered. And what they revealed changed everything we thought we knew about the Duke. Long before Hollywood ever knew his name, John Wayne was simply Marion Robert Morrison, a boy born in the small town of Winterset, Iowa, on May 26, 1907. He entered the world already larger than life. At 13 pounds, his birth was so unusual that it became local news. From the very beginning, Wayne's size and presence seemed destined to make an impact, but his childhood was not without danger. At just 3 years old, little Marion nearly drowned when he slipped into an icy creek. By chance, a stranger pulled him out just in time. That brush with death would later be echoed in his life again and again, moments where fate seemed to step in and keep him alive, at least long enough to become the legend he would one day be. In 1916, the Morrison family moved west to California, seeking better opportunity. They settled in Glendale, and young Marion found himself drawn to the wide open spaces and adventurous lifestyle of the American West. It was here that he was given the nickname that would follow him forever. Every day, he walked the neighborhood with his giant Airedale dog, Duke. Locals began calling them Big Duke and Little Duke, and though Marion disliked his given name, he embraced the nickname. From then on, Duke was who he was. Sports became the defining passion of his teenage year. At Glendale High School, he excelled in football and other athletics, eventually earning a scholarship to the University of Southern California. For a boy from humble beginnings, this was his ticket to something greater. Wayne dreamed of becoming a lawyer, maybe even a professional athlete. On the football field, his size and toughness made him a natural leader. But destiny, as it often did in Wayne's life, had other plans. In his sophomore year, a single accident changed everything. While body surfing at Newport Beach, Wayne crashed against the ocean floor and severely injured his shoulder. The pain lingered, and soon it became impossible for him to play. His scholarship was revoked, and just like that, the dreams of young Marion Morrison vanished. It was a devastating blow. With no money, no degree, and no clear future, he took odd jobs to make ends meet. One of those jobs was at Fox Studios. At first, Wayne was nothing more than a prop man, lugging furniture, moving equipment, and sometimes appearing as an extra. Hollywood was not glamorous in those early days. It was grueling, low-paying work that left Wayne exhausted and barely scraping by. But what he didn't know was that this detour, born out of desperation, was the first step toward the destiny he had never dared to imagine. On the sets of those early films, Wayne watched and learned. He studied how actors move, how directors shouted orders, how crews worked under pressure. Every day at the studio was a classroom. And even though he didn't know it yet, Duke Morrison was standing at the edge of a new identity, one that would soon transform him from a struggling college dropout into the most iconic cowboy the silver screen had ever seen. The path to stardom was anything but glamorous for young Duke Morrison. After losing his football scholarship and future at USC, he found himself stuck at Fox Studios, working long hours as a prop man and laborer. He hauled furniture, moved lighting equipment, and did whatever odd job was asked of him, often for just a few dollars a week. On occasion, he was tossed into crowd scenes as an extra, his face barely visible, forgotten the moment the cameras stopped rolling. Hollywood was not the land of dreams for him yet. It was a grind of sweat, rejection, and endless waiting. Between 1930 and 1939, Wayne managed to claw his way into starring roles, but not in the kinds of films that made stars. He appeared in more than 80 so-called poverty row westerns, low-budget productions shot in a matter of days. These films paid little, offered no prestige, and were usually churned out to fill double feature slots at small-town theaters. Audiences barely remembered his name, and critics ignored his work completely. Still, Wayne worked tirelessly, riding horses through desert, firing blanks from six-shooters, and wearing out his boots for roles that earned him just enough to survive. At night, he often went home to canned beans and cheap bread, living a life far removed from the glamorous star who walked the same studio lot. By 1938, after nearly a decade of obscurity, Wayne began questioning his future. He had been stuck in B-grade westerns for so long that he wondered if his chance had already passed. Friends recalled him considering leaving Hollywood altogether, searching for stability outside of an industry that seemed unwilling to recognize his potential. But fate intervened in the form of director John Ford. Ford, already a towering figure in Hollywood, had worked with Wayne during his early studio days and saw something in the young man others dismissed. When casting began for Stagecoach in 1939, Ford insisted that Wayne play the lead role of the Ringo Kid. Studio executives resisted, arguing Wayne was not a proven name and audiences wouldn't buy tickets to see him. But Ford stood his ground, and his gamble would pay off. When Stagecoach hit theater, everything changed. From the moment Wayne appeared on screen, stopping a stagecoach with his rifle in hand, audiences were captivated. His striking presence, his slow drawl, and his effortless masculinity brought the character to life in a way no one else could. For the first time, Duke Morrison was no longer an anonymous extra or a forgotten cowboy in a cheap serial. He was John Wayne. Stagecoach became a critical and commercial success, hailed as one of the finest westerns ever made, and its star was suddenly thrust into the spotlight. In a single role, Wayne's years of struggle and poverty had paid off. He was no longer a struggling actor scraping by. He was on his way to becoming the Duke, the face of American cinema. With the success of Stagecoach in 1939, John Wayne was no longer just another actor struggling for scrap. He was suddenly a leading man with the kind of screen presence that audiences could not ignore. Hollywood had finally discovered what John Ford had always known, that Wayne carried within him a natural charisma, a sense of toughness and authenticity that set him apart from everyone else. Over the next 2 decades, Wayne built on that breakthrough, carefully shaping his image and taking roles that solidified his identity as the embodiment of rugged American masculinity. He partnered repeatedly with John Ford, and together, they created some of the most iconic films in cinema history. From They Were Expendable to Fort Apache, Rio Grande, and The Quiet Man, Ford pushed Wayne harder than anyone else ever dared. On set, Ford was known to ridicule him, insult him, even belittle him in front of the cast and crew. But Wayne took it all, knowing that the director was forcing him to dig deeper as an actor, and it worked. His performances became more nuanced, more believable, carrying a weight that matched his larger-than-life persona. By the 1950s, Wayne had become more than just an actor. He was a cultural symbol. His slow stride, his distinctive voice, and his commanding physical presence became trademark. Fans did not simply see him as a man playing a cowboy. They saw him as the cowboy, the sheriff, the soldier, the symbol of everything America believed itself to be. He was strength and courage personified. A man who never backed down from a fight, who stood tall against any enemy, who represented honor and integrity in a changing world. Unlike other actors of his generation, Wayne was selective about the roles he played. He famously turned down High Noon because he believed the film portrayed its sheriff as weak, a characterization that clashed with the image he wanted to project. To Wayne, every role was an extension of the myth he was building, a myth that had to align with his ideals of toughness, loyalty, and patriotism. But even as his star power grew and his films began dominating the box office, Wayne was aware that the image audiences adored was not the man he was off-screen. The Duke was a carefully constructed legend, one that demanded constant upkeep. And as the years passed, Wayne began to feel the burden of maintaining that larger-than-life identity. Still, throughout the 1940s and 1950s, he cemented himself as the biggest name in Hollywood, the box office king who could carry war films westerns and dramas alike. To his fans, he wasn't acting. He was living out the values they cherished, the ones they wished they could see in themselves. And in doing so, John Wayne didn't just build a career, built a legend, one that would outlive him by decades. Behind the camera, John Wayne was not the unshakable cowboy the public adored. His personal life was messy, complicated, and often just as dramatic as the films he starred in. Wayne married 3 times, and each marriage revealed a different side of the man who seemed invincible on screen. His first wife, Josephine Science, came from a wealthy, deeply religious family that never approved of Wayne's drinking, smoking, and career in Hollywood. They had 4 children together, and though Wayne tried to balance fatherhood with his rising career, his absence and restless spirit put a strain on the marriage. During this time, he began a passionate affair with legendary actress Marlene Dietrich, a romance that would last for years. Wayne was captivated by Dietrich's confidence and allure, and though he never left Josephine for her, the affair was an open secret in Hollywood. By 1945, his marriage had collapsed, and he and Josephine divorced. His second marriage was far more explosive. In 1946, Wayne wed Esperanza Bauer, a fiery Mexican actress with a jealous streak. Their marriage was marked by constant fighting, fueled by Wayne's drinking and Esperanza's suspicion of his infidelity. One night, after Wayne returned home late from a party, Esperanza, convinced he had been with another woman, grabbed a pistol and fired at him in a drunken rage. The bullet missed, but the marriage was already doomed. They divorced in 1954, leaving Wayne emotionally battered and more cautious about love. His third marriage seemed at first to offer stability. In 1954, he married Peruvian actress Pilar Palete, who was nearly 20 years his junior. They had 3 children together, and for a while, Wayne seemed to find happiness in family life. But as his career consumed more of his time, cracks began to appear. Wayne was away on long shoots for months at a time, and when he was home, his drinking and womanizing continued to cause problems. By the early 1970s, Pilar and Wayne were living separate, though they never formally divorced. In his final years, Wayne found companionship with his secretary, Pat Stacy, who cared for him as his health began to fail. Rumors of other affairs, including one with longtime co-star Maureen O'Hara, followed him throughout his life. For all his public image as a man of stability, Wayne's love life was chaotic, filled with passion, betrayal, and heartbreak. He could tame outlaws on screen, but when it came to the women in his life, John Wayne was often the one caught in the line of fire. By the late 1950s, John Wayne had already cemented his place as one of Hollywood's biggest stars, but there was one dream he couldn't let go of: making a film about the Battle of the Alamo. To Wayne, the Alamo wasn't just a piece of history. It was a symbol of American courage and sacrifice, and he was determined to bring it to life on screen with a scale and authenticity no one had ever attempted. Studios were hesitant, however, worried about the enormous costs and doubtful that audiences would embrace such a massive historical project. Wayne refused to take no for an answer. He decided to put his own fortune and reputation on the line, mortgaging nearly everything he owned to finance the film himself. By the time production began, the budget had ballooned to over $12 million, an unheard-of sum in 1960. Wayne not only directed the film, but also played the role of Davy Crockett, a choice that added to the strain of carrying the project on his shoulder. He insisted on authenticity in every detail, ordering the construction of a full-scale replica of the Alamo mission in Brackettville, Texas. More than 1.5 million adobe bricks were used, and the massive set became so realistic that it later turned into a tourist attraction long after the cameras stopped rolling. Thousands of extras were hired, hundreds of horses brought in, and the production schedule dragged on for 79 grueling days under the blistering Texas sun. Wayne pushed himself and his cast to the limits, determined to create the definitive version of the story. But when the film finally premiered in 1960, it did not meet the expectations Wayne had dreamed of. Though it received Oscar nominations and won for Best Sound, critics were divided, and the box office returns were disappointing. Despite its epic scope and Wayne's passion, the film struggled to recoup its enormous budget. For Wayne, it was more than just a financial setback. It was a personal blow. He had gambled everything on the project, hoping it would cement his legacy not just as a star, but as a filmmaker of vision and courage. Instead, the financial strain left him vulnerable, and for the first time in years, Hollywood's most invincible cowboy looked uncertain. The Alamo would remain one of the most defining yet haunting chapters of his career, a project born of love and patriotism, but one that nearly cost him everything. When the private quarters of Graceland were finally accessed, one of the most unexpected discoveries was a collection of handwritten journals tucked away in Elvis Presley's upstairs office. Unlike the flashy memorabilia often displayed downstairs, these journals revealed a deeply vulnerable side of the king of rock and roll, one that very few people ever knew. Written late at night, often in shaky handwriting, Elvis poured out his thoughts, worries, and dreams. Many of the entries showed a man overwhelmed by the crushing weight of fame, burdened by the responsibility of providing for his family, and haunted by a sense of loneliness that no crowd could ever cure. In some passages, he confessed to struggling with health issues and the medications prescribed to him, admitting that he felt trapped in a cycle he couldn't break. What struck many was how he longed for a simpler life, one free from the constant pressure of being Elvis Presley. He wrote about his daughter, Lisa Marie, expressing how much he loved her and his hope that she would grow up happy despite the chaos surrounding him. But there were also darker notes, writings where he questioned whether he had anything left to give, revealing a man fighting private battles while still smiling for the camera. For those who read them, the journals were heartbreaking, offering an unfiltered look into Elvis's soul. They weren't the words of a superstar, but of a man who desperately wanted peace. When the upstairs closet in Elvis Presley's private quarters was finally open, it revealed far more than just clothes and shoes. It was like stepping into the secret vault of a man who carried the weight of the world on his shoulder. The closet was large, lined with cedar wood, and heavy with the smell of time. The first thing noticed were the jumpsuits. Some of them were stage outfits from the 1970s, sparkling with rhinestones though dulled by dust. Others were casual pieces, denim jackets, button-up shirts, and custom-tailored blazers, all perfectly preserved as though Elvis might return any moment to pull one from the hanger. The clothes alone painted a picture of a man who lived both as a global superstar and as someone yearning for ordinary comfort. But the further people searched, the more haunting the discoveries became. Tucked into boxes on the top shelves were thousands of unopened fan letters, many of them yellowed with age. Some envelopes were marked urgent, others with hearts drawn in pen, and a few clearly written by children who saw Elvis not as a celebrity, but as a hero who might help them through difficult times. These letters had never been read by him, sealed forever in that dark closet. It struck everyone that even though Elvis was adored worldwide, he was a man isolated by fame, unable to respond to the millions who reached out in love or desperation. The letters gave the space a melancholy air, reminding onlookers of the connection he longed for but could never fully embrace. The deeper corners of the closet revealed more intimate belonging. There were framed photographs of Priscilla and Lisa Marie, carefully wrapped in cloth, perhaps hidden away during moments when memories were too painful to confront. Alongside them were reels of home movies, unmarked film canisters stacked neatly, likely holding family moments the public had never seen. These small tokens showed Elvis not as the king, but as a father, a husband, and a man clinging to pieces of the life he cherished most. Then came the most chilling discovery. Behind neatly pressed shirts, someone found prescription bottles stuffed into shoeboxes, dozens of, with labels from various doctors and pharmacies, confirming the stories that Elvis had struggled with prescription drug dependency in his later years. To see the evidence gathered in such a private space was both shocking and deeply saddening. It was clear that he had hidden them away, not only from prying eyes, but perhaps even from himself, tucking away reminders of the battle he couldn't overcome. Yet the closet also revealed Elvis's spiritual side. Stacks of religious books lined one corner, Bibles, books on mysticism, philosophy, and even astrology. Margins were filled with his handwriting, underlined passages, and notes that showed his constant search for meaning. Here was a man torn between earthly fame and a desperate longing for peace in the unseen world. In this small, confined space, those two sides of Elvis collided. The glamorous performer who wore rhinestone-studded jumpsuits and the troubled soul hiding bottles of pills behind them. The locked closet ultimately felt less like storage and more like a time capsule of Elvis Presley's inner life. Every hanger, every box, every hidden bottle told a piece of his story. It was a place where triumph and tragedy were stacked side by side, untouched for decades, waiting for someone to finally open the door. Those who saw it firsthand walked away shaken, not because they found something scandalous, but because they saw Elvis Presley stripped of myth, revealed only as a man desperately trying to balance love, fame, faith, and pain. If there was one room upstairs at Graceland that carried the heaviest weight of all, it was Elvis Presley's private bathroom. For years it had been sealed off, locked away not only from the public, but even from most of his family and staff. Everyone knew why, because this was the very spot where Elvis's life had come to an end on August 16, 1977. Walking into the room decades later was like stepping into frozen time, a place where the air itself felt heavy with sorrow. The bathroom was surprisingly ordinary compared to the lavish downstairs halls of Graceland. White fixtures, modest tiling, and a simple vanity mirror replaced any sense of glamour. And yet, everything inside carried the shadow of history. The countertop still held personal items Elvis used daily: bottles of cologne, a hairbrush with strands of his jet-black dyed hair, and grooming tools he likely reached for in his final hours. The medicine cabinet, though cleared of its original contents, once held the prescriptions that played a tragic role in his decline. Standing there, it was impossible not to imagine the routine of a man who, despite his fame, lived and struggled like anyone else. The most haunting detail, however, was not the items left behind, but the knowledge of what had occurred in that room. Witnesses who entered after his passing recalled how the bathroom seemed to tell a silent story of exhaustion and loneliness. A book, reportedly on spirituality, was left nearby, hinting that Elvis may have spent his last moments searching for comfort in words, rather than the stage lights he once thrived under. The bathroom became a place of contradiction, a sanctuary where he sought privacy, and at the same time, the site of unimaginable tragedy. To walk into it years later was to feel the immense pressure of fame, the weight of his struggle, and the frailty of a man hidden beneath the image of a superstar. Even though the bathroom has never been open to the public, those who have been inside describe it as overwhelming, not because of its appearance, but because of its history. The quietness of the space carried a heaviness that could not be ignored. It wasn't just a room, it was the place where the king's story ended, a reminder that no amount of fame or wealth can shield someone from their human vulnerability. The bathroom upstairs at Graceland remained untouched, preserved, almost as if in mourning. More than any other discovery, it was the one that left people shaken, standing face to face with the reality that Elvis Presley, a man worshipped by millions, had lived his last moments in heartbreaking solitude. When the upstairs at Graceland was finally explored in full, those who walked through it realized they weren't just looking at rooms. They were standing inside Elvis Presley's private world, a world frozen exactly as it had been in August of 1977. Unlike the polished, museum-like quality of the downstairs tour that millions of visitors see each year, the upstairs carried the raw, unfiltered truth of Elvis's final years. Every item, from his clothes draped on chairs to records left by the stereo, told a story of a man both larger than life and painfully human. It was not the glamorized vision of Elvis that the public remembered, but a deeply personal portrait of a man who bore the crushing weight of fame while yearning for simplicity and peace. The untouched nature of these rooms made them feel eerily alive, as though Elvis had simply stepped out for a moment and might return at any second. This sensation shook everyone who saw it, because it forced them to confront the reality that behind the legend was a man trapped by isolation, dependency, and exhaustion. Yet what struck observers most wasn't just the tragedy, it was the tenderness preserved in those walls. The photographs of Lisa Marie, the letters from fans, the books stacked with handwritten notes, and the small signs of daily life all reminded people that Elvis was not just the king of rock and roll. He was a father, a son, a friend, and a human being who searched endlessly for love and meaning. These rooms held not only the remnants of his decline, but also glimpses of the man who loved deeply, laughed often, and gave the world music that will never fade. Graceland's upstairs remains closed to the public, preserved by the Presley family as sacred ground. And perhaps that is fitting, because what lies there is not a spectacle for display, but the intimate truth of a man who carried both unimaginable glory and unbearable pain. For those who finally went upstairs, what they saw was heartbreak, but it was also profoundly moving. It revealed Elvis Presley not as a myth, but as a man whose story ended too soon, leaving behind a legacy frozen in time, echoing through every silent room of Graceland.